Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. And we're back with another look at the history news headlines to mark the first Friday of the month. And this time we're looking at the headlines that caught my eye in November 2022. As always, I will be using my description box to link the history news articles that we're looking at today, in addition to any other relevant materials. Today we've got some updates, some new news, and some upcoming and recently opened and indeed soon to close events and exhibitions to have a look at. There's also going to be a link to the November History News pinboard that I've already created over on Opera for you all to check out. But without further ado, it's now time to take a look at all of the history news headlines from November 2022. I've decided that I'm going to continue the experiment that I started last month in terms of how I start this section of my video, because once again, a number of very kind people have taken the time to share multiple history news headlines with me from last month. And rather than thank them before each separate story, I will be offering my thanks to the group as a whole right now. Individual credit for the respective story or stories will be found in both my description box and also on the Opera pinboard. Today, I would like to extend my thanks to all those who reached out to me across social media. Massive thanks go to Yvonne, Lemmasmith, Maria, Joe, Granny Hannie, Robert, Lots of Whatever, Anne, Patricia, Melanie, Jane, Pamela, Lisa, Christopher, Marie, Theodosius Snudpuckle and Jolori67. I'm very grateful to each of you for taking time out of your day, or indeed days, to send me history news articles. Thank you all again very much. And now let's hop into the history news updates. First up, I want to point you in the direction of this article in the Financial Times that was sent to me last month. If, like myself, you have found yourself getting extremely invested in the story and the future of the Benin bronzes, then I highly recommend that you check this article out in full. It starts by taking a look at the current collection that's on display at the Benin City National Museum in Edo, Nigeria. From there, the article goes on to explore the lost, looted cultural treasures. It shows how complex it has been to track these pieces down. It looks at how the Digital Benin project solved many of these problems, and how the existence of this project appears to be contributing towards the push for restitution. In short, I think this is an excellent article that sets out the situation as it currently stands very clearly. We're staying with the Benin bronzes for the next news items too. First up, the BBC reports that a group of African Americans have filed a lawsuit to stop the return of some Benin bronzes from the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. to Nigeria. The group point out that as the Kingdom of Benin did not produce enough metal to supply its casting industry, it naturally relied on imports. They also state that around 50 manila bracelets, like the one shown here, could be obtained when exchanged for a woman, while 57 would purchase a man. Bracelets like these would then be melted down and made into those famous and contested artworks. Dedria Farmer Paelman, the founder and executive director of the Restitution Study Group, explains, quote, "What we are saying is that the descendants of the people traded for these manillas have a right to see the bronzes where they live. There is no reason why we should be obligated to travel to Nigeria to see them." She then went on to reference US travel warnings, stating, "I don't want to get kidnapped." Critics of this position and of the campaign to stop the restitutions point out that not all of the manillas used in Benin were from the slave trade. Ivory, for example, was also traded, as were other commodities. Additionally, the Nigerian art historian Chika Okiki Egulu, who is a professor at Princeton University and also an activist at the forefront of the campaign to return this looted artwork, described the claims about safety concerns, quote, as another version of Afro-pessimism that we've heard for a long time. I wonder how this debate is going to affect the move for repatriation, and indeed whether it should. Here in London, I believe that this next Benin update in fact relates to the very first Benin story that I ever covered, because last month saw the repatriation of 6 artefacts from the Horniman Museum in London into the hands of Abba Tijani, the Director General of Nigeria's National Commission for Museums and Monuments, also known as the NCMM. The Guardian reports that, quote, the 6 artefacts handed over on Monday were selected as being representative of 72 Benin items in the Horniman's collection. An agreement between the NCMM and the Horniman will allow the remaining 66 objects to stay in the UK on loan for the next 12 months, with a second phase of repatriations to come. The move is the first time a UK government-funded institution has agreed to hand back treasures looted by British forces. 2 other Benin bronzes, a cockerel sculpture held by Jesus College, Cambridge, and the head of an oba or ruler held by Aberdeen University, have also been returned from Britain to Nigeria. But this news from the Horniman, I must say, it does feel a little bit like a full circle moment, doesn't it? The British Museum held its annual trustees' dinner on the 2nd of November, and the art newspaper reported on the speech that was given by the museum's chair, George Osborne, at that particular event. The article provides the following excerpts from his speech. Quote, we hear the voices calling for restitution, but creating this global British Museum was the dedicated work of many generations. Dismantling it must not become the careless act of a single generation. The law prevents it. How can we expect to escape from the maelstrom of the moment? We don't. But don't expect us to be passive in the face of it. All of which sounds, in a way, oddly aggressive to me, and also like the British Museum is somehow being victimised in all of this. However, he is also quoted saying in the same speech that he is, quote, confident that there are long-term partnerships to be struck. And maybe we aren't past the point of negotiations regarding something like long-term loans with a nominal continuation of British Museum title to the ownership of artefacts. However, I think it's worth pointing out that I don't think that we're very far from other institutions around the world, both those who have reclaimed items and those who have returned them, taking a stance of principle that will see them turn against working or indeed engaging with institutions who are refusing to repatriate. And with the British Museum's current stance, that will be a problem. NBC News reported that the planned repatriation of 150 sacred artefacts to the Lakota Sioux peoples from the Barry Museum, which we discussed in last month's episode, did in fact take place as planned on the 5th of November 2022. But this was not the only repatriation of this kind to have taken place, or indeed to be in the offing, because ABC reports that Colgate University is set to return more than 1,500 items that were once buried with ancestral remains back to the Oneida Indian nation. The collection in question includes pendants, pots, bells, glass beads, ceramic pottery, knives, harpoons, a stone pipe, and turtle shell rattles, some of which date back 400 years. These artefacts have been described as funerary objects because it's thought likely that they were originally deposited with human remains. The Oneida Indian Nation representative, Ray Hallbritter, said that this is one of the largest single repatriations in the state. and he praised the cooperation from Colgate, which began a series of transfers back in 1995 with the return of 7 sets of remains and funerary objects. Meanwhile, Harvard's Peabody Museum has pledged to return hundreds of hair samples taken from Native American children who were enrolled in government-run schools in the 1930s. And additionally, that institution has apologised for keeping those clippings in its collection. According to the Harvard Crimson, quote, "The hair collection, amassed by anthropologist George Edward Woodbury between 1930 and 1933, includes samples from around 700 children, spanning 300 native tribes." Jane Pickering, director of the museum, issued a statement that included the following, quote, "The Peabody Museum apologises to Indigenous families and tribal nations for our complicity in the objectification of native peoples and for our more than 80-year possession of hair taken from their relatives. We recognise that for many Native American communities, hair holds cultural and spiritual significance, and the museum is fully committed to the return of hair back to families and tribal communities." As to why the hair was taken in the first place, according to the Peabody's website, anthropological research conducted with hair samples in the early 1900s was often, quote, "carried out to support, directly or indirectly, scientific racism. Descriptions and measurements of hair types were used to justify racial categories and hierarchies." I get the feeling that repatriations of this kind will be in our news updates on this channel for some time to come. We also aren't finished with the Manhattan DA's office and their ongoing work to repatriate stolen artefacts and to prosecute those responsible. Last month, District Attorney Alvin L. Bragg Jr. announced that his office had returned 192 looted antiquities with an overall value of nearly $3.4 million to Pakistan. CNN reports that, quote, 187 of the returned items are linked to the Indian-American antiquities dealer Subhash Kapoor, who stands accused of running a multi-million-dollar trafficking network via his Manhattan gallery, Art of the Past. Earlier this month, Kapoor was sentenced by an Indian court to 10 years in prison for smuggling offences. He has also been indicted alongside 7 co-defendants in the US, where investigators say he helped traffic thousands of treasures stolen from temples, ruins, and archaeological sites across Asia. The Manhattan District Attorney's Antiquities Trafficking Unit has seized more than 2,500 artefacts, worth an estimated $143 million, as part of its investigations into Kapoor. Speaking to CNN earlier this month, the disgraced dealer's lawyer said he intends to challenge attempts to extradite his client to the US. Whether or not this challenge will be successful, I will of course keep you up to date, and I will also make sure that I'm keeping an eye out for anything else that the Manhattan DA will be announcing. Our final updates for this episode relate to the excavations and finds that we heard about last month. The team of archaeologists working at the ancient necropolis of Saqqara have reported the discovery of a number of finds that include the tomb of a previously unknown Egyptian queen called Neith. At the same time, they've also found a trove of 300 coffins, over 100 mummies, and other antiquities. We are told that this excavation site is close to Cairo, and that it's thought that the mummies found there may belong to generals and advisors. It is also thought that these represent New Kingdom burials, which means that they would have taken place from between 1570 BCE and 1069 BCE. The famed Egyptologist Zahi Hawass explains that, quote, "The coffins have individual faces, each one unique, distinguishing between men and women, and are decorated with scenes from the Book of the Dead. Each coffin also has the name of the deceased and often shows the 4 sons of Horus who protected the organs of the deceased. This dig began in 2020, and other recent finds to have been found on the site include a mummy of a woman with a solid gold mask, gaming pieces for the ancient game of Senet, a massive limestone sarcophagus, and a soldier buried with a metal axe in his hand. Some of these artefacts will be put on display for the public in the Grand Egyptian Museum, which is reportedly due to open next year. Staying on this topic, I know that in previous episodes I have talked about the discovery of mummified remains in Egypt, where the individual in question's tongue has been removed and then replaced with a golden version. Last month, we learned that several more mummies with golden tongues had been found in the central Nile Delta, and although every new find brings with it more evidence, and thus a greater understanding of the past, I think it's worth pointing out that in this instance, when it comes to these gold tongues, it is still the case that what these particular additions meant, or what they were intended to achieve, remains obscured to us. Some scholars have suggested that they may have been a way to get on Osiris's good side. They may relate to the sun god Ra and thus to the concept of eternity, or alternatively, perhaps it was meant to be a line to the light in the darkness of the afterlife. While we may not be sure what these gold tongues mean now, perhaps another set of remains will be found, or sets of remains with gold tongues in place, and the context around them will tell us more. Will unlock the key to figure out what this means. Perhaps these gold tongues will speak to us across the silence of the centuries. Those were the updates. Now it's time to look at the new news. The British Library has recently acquired 2 documents relating to Mary Queen of Scots' imprisonment in England. The first is a letter that was written by the Scottish Queen just 5 weeks after she escaped from Lochleven Castle and fled into England in May 1568. The second document is a set of official financial accounts that detail Mary's upkeep at Wingfield Manor and Tutbury Castle for the period spanning between the 18th of December 1584 to the 27th of February 1585. These manuscripts provide a detailed account of Mary Queen of Scots' lifestyle while she was in custody in England. According to Hope Coke, writing for Tatler, quote, "The parchment scrolls reveal that Mary enjoyed the attendance of a large household, dined under her own canopy of state, hung above the seat of an important person as a symbol of authority, and was served 2 courses at both dinner, the contemporary name for the midday meal, and supper, the evening meal, with each course encompassing a choice of no less than 16 dishes. Kitchen expenses disclose that the Catholic pretender to the throne dined on fine foods, including meat, beef, mutton, lamb, veal, boar and pork, poultry, capons, geese, hens, heron, partridge and blackbirds, and fish, cod, salmon, eels, herring, plaice, haddock, sole, oysters, pike, roach, carp and trout. Dishes were richly scented with spices, pepper, cloves, cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, mace and saffron, a delicacy only introduced to England around the 14th century. And Mary enjoyed a number of items from overseas that would have been regarded as exotic at the time. Oranges, olives, capers, dates, almonds and figs, plus sweet indulgences, marmalade, caraway biscuits and fruit in syrup, along with ale and wine. Andrea Clark, lead curator of medieval and early modern manuscripts at the British Library, reportedly referred to Mary's, quote, deluxe imprisonment. And I don't know about you, but I can certainly see what she means. Excavations of a Viking settlement in Stockholm have uncovered the remains of 20 houses and structures that date from around 400 CE and then continue in use into the Viking Age from 800 to 1050 CE and then beyond that into the early Middle Ages. Now, the article detailing this discovery did in fact come out on the 31st of October, so it's not technically November news, but I think, as it came in so late, I'm free to make this allowance for myself to include it here, and so that's what I'm doing. As the team were excavating a wooden floor, they found a ceramic pot containing a pouch made of linen holding silver coin pendants, which were themselves used as jewellery. And this was in addition to various other items of jewellery, including 8 high-quality torque-style neck rings, 2 arm rings, 1 ring, and 2 pearls. Several of the coin pendants use currency from England, Bohemia, and Bavaria, but 5 of them feature Arabic dirhams, which points to the wide reach of the trading networks that existed during this period. The artefacts that have just been uncovered are currently being cleaned and conserved, but hopefully there will soon be an update about a future exhibition location for all of these finds. It seems that the long hunt for the Revolutionary War prisoner camp, known as Camp Security, may finally be at an end. Last month, it was reported that evidence of the camp's stockade, and this evidence was a series of post holes, has been located near York, Pennsylvania. The post holes themselves were found under about a foot of topsoil, and they formed the outline of the stockade that it's thought at one time may have housed some 1,200 British prisoners of war. USA Today reports that this dig began in 2013. So it has taken them the best part of 10 years to make this discovery, and I imagine that everybody involved is going to be utterly overjoyed. The National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. received a $10 million gift from the relatives of Vicky Sant, the late collector who became the museum's first female president back in 2003. The museum has decided that this new endowment fund, which is going to be distributed under the official title, the Victoria P. Sant Fund for Women Artists, is going to be used to acquire masterpieces that were created by women. And this will be happening in order to address the historical gaps in the museum's collection. I do hope that there will be updates released regarding which pieces have been acquired using this incredibly generous fund. An ancient Christian monastery was recently discovered by archaeologists who were working on an island that is just off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. Samples that were found in this monastery's foundations were radiocarbon dated to between the early 6th to mid-7th century CE, which means that this monastery is likely to date from the time before Islam spread across the Arabian Peninsula. The site reportedly contains a single-aisle church, with rooms to hold a baptismal font, as well as an oven for baking bread or wafers for communion rites. Additionally, it is thought that a nave once held an altar and an installation for communion wine. This is the second such monastery to be found in the Emirates that dates back as much as 1400 years, with the first monastery being found in the early 1990s. Last month, CNN explored the work of a group called the Friends of Lebanon Cemetery. The cemetery in question is located in York County, Pennsylvania, and we are told that it is 150 years old. Until the mid-1960s, Lebanon was one of the only cemeteries in this area in which African Americans could be buried. CNN reports that, quote, "Through research and genealogy efforts, Friends of Lebanon Cemetery also have unearthed the stories of everyday folks, school teachers, factory workers, chefs and barbers who helped York thrive. They lie alongside more prominent figures, including Underground Railroad agents, suffragettes, Buffalo soldiers, a Tuskegee airman, and other veterans. Together, they connect York's robust history to overlooked chapters of the American biography." In addition to this article, I will be leaving a link to the Friends of Lebanon Cemetery website as well, so you can check out the stories that have been uncovered there. You can take a look at the conservation work that this group have been engaged in, and if you are willing and able, you can donate to help them with their work in the future. 24 bronze statues, which date back 2,300 years, have been located, partially submerged, at the site of an ancient spa in San Casciano de Bagni, which is near Siena, in Tuscany, in Italy. It is thought that these baths were built by the Etruscans originally in the 3rd century BCE, and that subsequently they were reworked during the Roman period. The finds in question represent an important testament to the transition between these Etruscan and Roman periods. The art newspaper describes the finds as follows, quote, "Intricate and rich in detail. The bronzes include votive statues of pagan gods, as well as depictions of young men, elderly matrons, and emperors. Some are preserved fully intact, while others are dismembered. Archaeologists speculate that the works, 5 of which are around a metre tall, were cast by local craftsmen. A number are so well preserved that they still carry inscriptions of the names of eminent local Etruscans, a pre-Roman people that lived in the region. Further excavations on this site are due to begin next spring, but between now and then, the finds that have already been made are going to be restored and studied. We've been told that the ultimate plan is to house these artefacts in a 16th century building that has recently been bought by the Culture Ministry in the town of San Casciano. We're also informed that the site of the ancient baths themselves are due to be developed into an archaeological park. An op-ed published last month by Sapiens provided a platform for the Caucasus Heritage Watch, or the CHW from this point, to detail their ongoing work and the concerns that work is raising. The team in question use aerospace technology, and they use it to track and provide evidence of the seemingly systematic yet also clandestine destruction of Armenian cultural heritage, as we can see in this first collection of satellite images. An 18th century new Armenian cemetery has been razed and then replaced by a museum honouring Azerbaijan. The team from CHW write that, quote, "The medieval and early modern monuments we documented were not simply ruined. They were purposely scrubbed entirely from the landscape and from official history. If such techniques of heritage erasure were to proliferate as a new tactic of national myth-making, countless irreplaceable monuments of the human past could be at risk around the world. But newly available data, imaging technologies, and a renewed willingness on the part of archaeologists to throw themselves into the maelstrom of conflict are now providing opportunities to bear witness to heritage destruction, and also to intervene. In 2021, the International Court of Justice ordered Azerbaijan to, quote, "take all necessary measures to prevent and punish acts of vandalism and desecration affecting Armenian cultural heritage." A positive step, no doubt, but unfortunately the team do say that in the summer of 2022, their analysis picked up the complete demolition of the 18th or 19th century Armenian church of St. Sargis. So it remains to be seen if this is going to be part of a continuous flouting of the court order or just an unfortunate one-off. Either way, I will certainly keep my eye out for any developments in this regard. Oxford University's Museum of Natural History and Pitt Rivers Museum have returned the human remains of 18 Indigenous Australians, which until now had been stored in cultural and scientific collections for more than a century. The Sydney Morning Herald reports that, quote, "the remains of one woman taken from Lake Howden, about 18 kilometres east of Robe, South Australia, in 1900, will return to home, while 17 more will be cared for in museums in Brisbane, Sydney and Canberra, while further research is undertaken to identify their traditional custodians." Laura van Brockhoven, director of Pitt Rivers, issued an apology, saying, quote, "I can only apologise for the many years that museums like ours didn't put ethics at the heart of who we were and how we acted. We were fuelled by colonial convictions, by our moral superiority, by an entitlement to study and display bones, because we, supposedly, were places of excellence that were dedicated to research and learning." This is the second round of repatriation for both institutions because Pitt Rivers returned the remains of 6 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in 1990, while the Oxford University Museum of Natural History returned 3 ancestors to their traditional custodians in 2009. And we have been informed that another round of repatriations are set to take place next year. I will, of course, be sure to update you if, and indeed when, that does occur. These spectacular tile fragments were located in eastern Poland by a team of archaeologists and historians. They were found during the excavation of the remains of a wooden castle in Zylechów, which lies just to the southeast of Warsaw. According to reports, this castle was likely built in the mid-5th century, only to be abandoned at the beginning of the 16th century and then burnt down in a fire later that century. Tiles of this type would have adorned the walls and floors of late medieval monarchs and nobles. And even when they're broken up like this, I think we can get an idea of just how dazzling the interior spaces could and indeed would have been. And that's not just the case for Poland either. If you have been to the Tower of London, perhaps you've spotted these reconstructed tiles in St Thomas's Tower. Because I must confess, when I saw this article, my thoughts certainly turned towards them. The past was a riot of colour, pattern and beauty. And that is going to be especially the case for the most privileged members of society. This gold ring dates back to 100 BCE, and it's believed to have once belonged to a Celtic leader. The ring was found in a field in Knaresborough by a metal detectorist in the 1990s, who then sold it on to its current owner for a few £100s. That individual decided, for some reason, to pop the ring in a cupboard for the next 28 years. But the situation changed recently when he took the ring to the British Museum to have it assessed, and then subsequently he chose to auction the piece. It was expected to fetch £30,000. Now, this auction has already happened, and the ring was purchased by a British private collector for £36,000, so a little over the estimate. And the BBC reports that currently the Yorkshire Museum is discussing the possibility of displaying the ring publicly with this new owner. For those looking for evidence of the value of talking about repatriations, and about how important it is from an ethical and, in many cases, legal standpoint for any artefacts in a person or institution's possession to be fully provenanced, we can now look to the example set by John S. Gompertz. This former CEO of America's Promise Alliance has disclosed that while he was reading an article in The Guardian about stolen artefacts, he realised that he had inherited 19 items from his grandmother with no provenance. According to the Greek reporter, quote, his grandmother, Gisela Schneider-Hermann, was of German-Dutch origin. In 1992, she died at the age of 98. Gompertz knew that she had participated actively in excavations in Italy and Greece in the 1950s and 1960s. She had even published scientific articles on it. Her grandson had no idea how she obtained the artefacts in question, but he did say that they, quote, were her obsession, her entire existence. It has been determined that of the 19 pieces, 12 rightfully belong to Greece, 4 to Italy, 1 to Pakistan, and 2 to Cyprus. Altogether, it is thought that these pieces were worth around €90,000. Explaining his decision to repatriate the items, Gompertz explained, quote, it seemed like the right thing to do. I read stories on repatriation, and I thought, we have these pieces that are 2,500 years old from other countries. We should explore whether we can give them back. This small ivory comb, which dates to 1700 BCE, which was unearthed in 2016 in central Israel, is inscribed, it has been found, with the oldest decipherable full sentence in an alphabet to ever be found. Written in Canaanite, the sentence reads, when translated, quote, may this tusk root out the lice of the hair and the beard. Sure enough, when the teeth of this comb were examined, traces of ancient head lice were discovered. They found the tough outer membranes of the species in its nymph stage. The next headline we're going to look at now is also a potential inspiration for a future full video on this channel that will look at the portraiture and probably the sculptures that are said to be of William Shakespeare. So if that sounds good and interesting to you, do let me know and I will be sure to put it on my list for the future. But back to today's video. The Guardian reports that, quote, a portrait said to be the only signed and dated image of William Shakespeare created during his lifetime has gone on sale for more than £10 million and is being displayed in London. It is the work of Robert Peake, court painter to King James I, and is signed and dated 1608. The artwork went on display at Grosvenor House Hotel in West London. As with so many images of the man from Stratford, the true identity of the subject in this piece, and just how valid a representation of Shakespeare it may be, is something that is highly contested and disputed. It also points out in this article that this painting is going to be sold by private treaty, which means without an auction. Now, I don't know how common or indeed rare of an occurrence a sale like this would be, and nor am I sure what choosing to sell in this manner might indicate about either the piece or perhaps the seller. So, if on the off chance there is an auctioneer watching, or someone who knows an auctioneer, maybe we could get some insight that I can then pin in the comments, because I'm sure that we'd all be very grateful. Here we have another reminder of the value of asking Santa Claus for a metal detector for Christmas, because somebody uncovered this ring in the English countryside near Thorcombe in Dorset in 2019. This medieval diamond ring bears a French inscription that translates roughly as follows: I hold your faith, hold mine. Experts believe that this find is the wedding ring of Joan Brooke, given to her by her husband, Thomas Brooke. The couple married in 1388. Joan was the widow of Robert Cheddar, a wealthy cloth merchant who was twice the mayor of Bristol, and thus the Brooke family found itself enriched by this match. This ring was set to be auctioned on November the 29th, and if the outcome of the auction, including how much the ring actually went for, is made available before I upload this video, then I will be putting that information on screen here now, and I will also be writing what it went for in my description box. The ring was expected to fetch between £30,000 and £40,000, or $35,500 and $47,300. The Washington Post reported on a Smithsonian-sponsored program to train divers who come from Africa and those of African descent in the skills of maritime archaeology. The team undergoing the training at this time were part of a program to explore what researchers believe are the wrecks of slave ships off the coast of Senegal. Gabrielle Miller, the archaeologist for the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, explained that the goal was to begin to decolonise the historically white area of study. In the United States and Britain, surveys show that fewer than 1% of professional archaeologists are black. Miller, a black woman, said the number of black maritime archaeologists is even smaller. On both sides of the Atlantic, Miller said, black people often have a complicated relationship with water. During the slave trade, they were taken from the areas bordering rivers and coasts on which they'd relied for their living. Today, redlining and environmental racism have often left black communities with insufficient or polluted water. I think this project sounds really exciting, and I can't wait to see what this new brace of archaeologists are going to uncover and show us all. A heist at a German museum in Manching, Bavaria, has resulted in the loss of a hoard of 450 Celtic coins worth several million euros. According to The Guardian, this, quote, coin theft is the latest in a series of high-profile museum heists in Germany. In 2017, the Big Maple Leaf, which is considered to be the world's second largest gold coin, was snatched from Berlin's prestigious Bode Museum. In 2019, 21 pieces of jewellery and other valuables were stolen from the Green Vault Museum in Dresden's Royal Palace. At the moment, it is not being suggested, or rather reported, that these crimes are linked to each other, but we are told in each case that a highly skilled group of professionals are thought to have been involved. We just don't know, or aren't being told, if it was the same group yet. A coin that was found within a hoard in 1713 that was then dismissed as a fake in 1863 has been reassessed recently. Scientists now say that rather than being a more recent forgery, the scratch marks on the coin that were visible under a microscope prove that it must have been in circulation 2,000 years ago. The coin bears the name Sponsian, and so researchers have now turned to looking into who this individual may have been. They believe that he was a military commander, someone who was ultimately forced to crown himself as emperor of the most distant and difficult to defend province of the Roman Empire, a place called Dacia. Archaeological studies have established that Dacia was cut off from the rest of the Roman Empire in around 260 CE. There was a pandemic, civil war, and the empire was fragmenting. Jesper Eriksson, who is the curator of coins at the Hunterian Museum at Glasgow University, states, quote, "Our interpretation is that he was in charge to maintain control of the military and of the civilian population, because they were surrounded and completely cut off. In order to create a functioning economy in the province, they decided to mint their own coins." You can see the coin as part of Sponsian, the rediscovery of a lost emperor. It's on at the Hunterian Museum at Glasgow University, and it's going to run until the 26th of March 2023. A 550 million year old fossil, which was discovered in Russia in 2018, appears to contain traces of what is being called the world's oldest animal meal. CNN reports that, quote, "In a fossilised specimen of the slug-like Kimberella, the team detected molecules of phytosterol preserved in this creature's gut. The chemical product, which is found in plants, suggested it ate algae and bacteria from the ocean floor. The paleontologist suggested that Kimberella was likely one of the most advanced creatures of the Diacaran era, with a mouth and a gut, and digested food in the same way modern animals do." The exploration of finds like this helps scientists to track the evolution of the earliest animals, and thus help us to understand better just how they relate to their descendants today. Excavations of a Neolithic site near Lviv in western Ukraine in 2022 have uncovered new details about the Kukateni Trypillian culture. This culture flourished in Moldova and parts of Ukraine and Romania between 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. However, recent work has revealed that the pioneers of this culture may have ventured west hundreds of years earlier than had previously been thought. Countless finds have been made on this site, from clay figurines and flint tools to clay pottery and grinding stones. But if we take the last of these, the grinding stones, researchers have concluded that grinding using these stones wouldn't result in fine flour. At most, they could crush seeds and use them for cooking porridge, but in doing so, chips of stone would also make their way into that porridge, which I'm sure we can all agree would have been absolutely wonderful for the teeth, although certainly nowhere near as devastating as sugar would prove to be many centuries later. The code used by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V in a letter to his ambassador at the French court in 1547 has finally been cracked by a team in France. The full translation of this letter is being held back by this team so that they can reveal it for the first time in an academic paper. However, they have let us know some of the themes that this missive covers. We are told the letter was written in the aftermath of King Henry VIII's death, for example, but also in the aftermath of a rebellion in Germany by a Protestant alliance called the Schmalkaldic League. The BBC reports that, quote, in the letter, Charles V reveals his concern to maintain the peace with France, so he can focus his forces against the League. He tells his ambassador to keep himself abreast of the thinking in the French court, in particular, any reaction to the death of King Henry. What he wants to avoid above all is the French and English combining to lend more assistance to the Protestant rebels. Charles V then speaks of a rumour, which is circulating, that he, the Emperor, is to be the target of an assassination attempt by the Italian condottieri, or mercenary leader, Pier Strozzi. The ambassador is told that he must find out as much as he can about this story. Is it just gossip, or a genuine threat? And finally, in the longest part of the letter, Charles V sets out for his ambassador the current state of play in his campaign against this Protestant League. He informs him there has been a new outbreak of rebellion in Prague, and the Emperor's nephew, Ferdinand of Tyrol, has been forced to flee. Charles V gives instructions on how his ambassador is to spin this news at the French court. He is to say the Prague rebellion is a minor affair, and Ferdinand has left the city because he wants to join his father, the Emperor's brother, on campaign. As we can see, some parts of this letter have been left uncoded, which historian Camille Desenclos explains was intentional. Because as there was a chance that this letter would be intercepted and then read by the French, it of course makes sense to pass them the message that you hope they're going to see in the clearest possible text. Excavations of the drains beneath the Colosseum in Rome have revealed evidence that appears to point to a practice that would have seen packs of Dacians, or at least their Roman ancestors, being made to perform for the crowds that once visited the Colosseum above. Alfonsina Russo, director of the Colosseum, explained that, quote, they were less than 30 centimetres, which is 11.8 inches in height. We think they may have been used to perform acrobatic tricks, just as you would see in a circus today. Or it may be they were used as part of staged hunts, or even pitched against bears and animals like that. We don't know for sure. Now, I can't say that I love either of these options as a potential fate for an adorable pack of little sausage dogs, but I am going to tell myself that what actually happened was they were there wearing little hats, playing with balls, maybe on a weird little doggy unicycle, just on their hind legs doing tricks, because that is the option that does feel less terrible. A new type of technology is being put to work to map a cornfield near Spring Bay in Illinois. This is being done in preparation for a future excavation of this site, which, we are told, was once a large Native American settlement that dates to around 1400. The devices being used here are called gradiometers, or gradiometers, and they have been described as, quote, really sensitive metal detectors. Greg Wilson, a professor of anthropology at the University of California, Santa Barbara, is quoted as saying, up and down the valley, we have done this with great results. We have been able to see the foundations of mounds and houses. We can see the rectangular outlines of storage pits and plazas. We can really see everything without digging. Certainly, as we can see from this scan image, it looks like archaeologists have been able to do some pretty clear mapping of the site so far, which I can only assume is going to be of great benefit when it comes to actually putting the shovels in the soil and excavating the site. So that was the new news, and now it's time to check out some events and exhibitions. As always, I want to know if you have been or have plans to go to any or indeed all of these exhibitions or events. And in addition, I want to read your thoughts on them, so do let us all know what you thought in the comment section beneath this video. For those in or with plans to visit Minneapolis in the near future, we're entering the last month or so for those hoping to attend Botticelli and Renaissance Florence, masterworks from the Uffizi. This exhibition, showcasing the works of Botticelli, paintings, sculptures and prints, represents an enviable opportunity to see the Uffizi stars that rarely travel outside of Italy. It is on display in the Target Gallery at the Minneapolis Institute of Art until the 8th of January 2023. Italy's Museum of Civilizations reopened to the public on the 26th of October 2022. And according to ArtNet's Hilly Pearlson, the museum has risen to the challenge of decolonising its collection. Readers are told, quote, "The encyclopedic collection counts over 2 million items and documents that came under one roof as the result of merging several state collections that have been closed to the public for years. It includes prehistoric artefacts, paleontology, and mineralogy collections, as well as items representing Italian folk traditions, ethnological collections, and the collection of the former Colonial Museum of Rome, which was inaugurated by Mussolini in 1923. The latter will most likely prove most challenging to study, as the Colonial Museum never used scientific methods of archiving and cataloguing, nor has it kept the biographies of the objects it had amassed. Of all the exhibitions and events I'm going to be covering this month, I do think I might be most keen to know what this museum is like now, how it's being received, and what people think its future might be. The Morgan Library and Museum in New York is hosting She Who Wrote, Enheduanna and the Women of Mesopotamia, from 3400 to 2000 BC, which, quote, brings together for the first time a comprehensive selection of artworks that capture the rich and shifting expressions of women's lives in ancient Mesopotamia during the 3rd millennium BCE. These works bear testament to women's roles in religious contexts, as goddesses, priestesses, and worshippers, as well as in social, economic, and political spheres as mothers, workers, and rulers. One particularly remarkable woman who wielded considerable religious and political power was the high priestess and poet Enheduanna, who lived circa 2300 BCE, the earliest named author in world literature. Bringing together a spectacular collection of her texts and images, this exhibition celebrates her timeless poetry and abiding legacy as an author, priestess, and woman. The exhibition will run until the 19th of February 2023. Oxburgh Hall in Norfolk, which is cared for by the National Trust, has entered into a partnership with the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. A collection of embroideries which were worked on by Mary Queen of Scots during her imprisonment in England are set to be displayed at Oxburgh Hall and will remain there on long-term loan from the V&A. Among this collection is a panel known as the Marian Hanging. It features a hand holding a pruning hook and cutting back a vine, and it was seen as an image that asserted Mary's claim to the throne, and potentially as a suggestion of the need to cut away the fruitless branch of the Tudor tree, represented by the childless Elizabeth. It was also interpreted as something that offered encouragement to Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, who was being proposed as a possible husband for Mary, to assassinate Elizabeth I so that her cousin could be installed upon her throne. This panel was cited as evidence before the Duke was ultimately found guilty of treason and then executed in 1572, and as we know, Mary herself would be executed in 1587. Oxburgh Hall is open for guided tours on Thursdays and Fridays, which can be booked on arrival, and it's free flow on Saturdays and Sundays. That's between 11 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. There are just a couple of days left to visit the London Wall site of the Museum of London before it closes for good on the 4th of December 2022. After this closure, the collection is going to move to a new site in West Smithfield that will be opening in 2025. Also closing on the same day, the 4th of December 2022, is the Sensational Books exhibition at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. I was really privileged to be invited to check out this free exhibition, and I thought it was fabulous. Not only were the items on display very special, but the way this exhibition was curated, the story, or rather stories that it told, was just beautifully designed. And to my mind, this is how exhibitions should be done. Last but by no means least, I'm not sure if this counts as an event or exhibition, but I think it belongs here as a cool place to visit, albeit virtually. It's an online exhibition, if you will. 7 European institutions have collaborated to create a database of 34,000 new images of medieval items, including manuscripts, books, and coins. The Europeana web portal is funded by the EU, and it seeks to preserve and share Europe's cultural heritage in easily accessible digital formats. And from looking at it, I'd say that the team are more than succeeding. But what do you think of any or all of the headlines that we've looked at today? Were there any headlines that caught your eye in November that I didn't discuss in this video? What about any exhibitions or events that you may have spotted or even attended? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comments section underneath this video, or you can find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to all of the places you can find me on the internet in my description box, so do follow me over on some or all of those so that we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. And if you did, please consider sharing with your friends. Please let me know you liked it as well by hitting the thumbs up. Do subscribe to the channel. And if you think you are subscribed, now is the perfect time to have a little check. I'll wait, just talk about it very quickly. Just make sure that YouTube hasn't mysteriously unsubscribed you against your will. And while you're there, as I know you are right now, checking, subscribing, possibly resubscribing, it's also an ideal time to hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down that will appear so that I am reliably informed. YouTube will tell you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.